Well, welcome everyone. You're here in the Story Mode Circle with Jill and Beth and our special guest, Brenna Lemieux. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself and let that siren pass by my window.
I thought you were going to say, and our special guest, the ambulance driver.
Well, Brenna, thanks so much. You are the first in what we hope will be a long line of fascinating interviews with content creators, imagination leaders, anyone really involved in this huge, massive world of storytelling and creativity. We wanted to talk to you first because I think you're a bit of a genius walking that line between writing really good, interesting content and getting it noticed.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me and for calling me a genius. um, I'm Brenna Lemieux. Today I lead the content team at Propeller, which is an agency that does PR and content marketing for B2B startups. We focus on startups that do SaaS, services, hard tech, and climate tech. That's a growing area for us.
Ooh.
And I've been there for 6 years now. This is my first role in an agency. Before that, I was in-house doing content marketing. And before that, I was in grad school studying poetry writing.
Yay!
Yeah. So I have a graduate degree in poetry. I have an undergraduate degree in English and French. And I really tumbled into content marketing purely by accident. I'm from the Baltimore area. I went to college in Pennsylvania and I got a degree in English. And then some of my friends were moving out to Chicago afterwards. And I thought, okay, that's where I'll live. And I just started applying for jobs at random online, kind of anything I thought I might be vaguely qualified for. And I landed in a content marketing role. And my boss told me a few months after I started, like, yeah, you did not know what you were doing, but we knew you could write, because I had to send a writing sample. And they were like, so we decided we could train you. It was a really happy accident, I think, for me.
Oh, yeah. I love how you've gone from, wow, you really didn't know what you were doing, to being introduced as a genius.
Right? Isn't that something? It's a career trajectory.
How do you feed the SEO beast?
Yes.
And still write good stuff? Like I'm sick of hearing, find the keyword, make sure you use it 14 times,
Yes.
can't be over 822 words,
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Good content is part of SEO because one of the signals that the search engines and the spiders pay attention to is time on page. And if you write really terrible, boring, or robotic sounding content, you might rank for a little while because you'll match that query, but people will click into it, they'll realize there's nothing there for them, and they'll leave. And that sends a very clear signal. So that kind of content doesn't have a long lifespan in search engine results pages. The content itself is search engine optimization. Quality content is part of optimization. So that's part one. Part two, so I love that you mentioned, start with the keywords and include it 14 times and whatever. And any SEO attempt that starts with keyword research is not good, in my opinion, because first of all, you're optimizing for a search engine. Great. But is that even where your audience is going to answer the kind of questions you can help them with? I mean, that has to be the first question. It's so much a chicken and egg problem. So there are many venues, many avenues. One of them is social media and emails and sales teams and all that kind of stuff. When I first started in SEO, which was back in 2007, when it was kind of all about keywords, you actually kind of did just need to write the keyword 100 times and whatever. There was this sense that I had at the beginning of my career that SEO was a very non-human process. The work of it was writing, and you had to write in a very robotic way. And then there was some technical work on the back end. And then you just kind of hoped that it would rank. You kind of set it free and hoped. And really that doesn't work. So much of getting content in front of people is promotion. It's proactive, and it's, engaged. Like I mentioned, social media, engaging in social media and not just sharing your blog post every week after you publish it, but being in a space where other people are and engaging with them and building a community in that way. Building a list, a newsletter email list where you can send out regular insights or irregular insights to keep people guessing. Also just, word of mouth. I know that's very, that's not necessarily a strategy you can lean into, but sales enablement content is really big. For the kind of work we do, meaning like you create that blog post, it answers a very specific question people have. And then one of your main distribution channels is salespeople who are like talking to prospects with that question.
Enablement is one of our crap words.
Ooh, good. Okay, good.
And crap, this is from Beth Nyland, the crap maker.
I am not
the crap acronym maker. It stands for corporate rhetoric and pomposity. And enablement is one of those words. Beth, is it a zombie word officially?
It is a word, yeah. So zombie, this woman, Helen Sword, wrote for the New York Times years ago a brilliant article about how we suck the life out of our writing by creating zombie words that are loaded with prefixes and suffixes. And there's usually a really good verb buried inside, like enable's not a good word. It's not a
better than enablement.
It is slightly better than enablement, but if we could rebrand, because we hear this sales enablement with everybody we work with, what would be a better phrase for what that means?
When a salesperson is talking to a prospect and they want to explain something better, they want to provide evidence or it's not a demonstration, a more in-depth exploration of an idea you've been talking about, or sometimes just demonstrate, we've been thinking about this. We understand that's a problem for you. And we've thought it through and here's how we think about fixing it. And then they send someone to that.
I feel like 20 years ago, I had a job where I was doing sales support material. So why do you suppose we had to go to enablement instead of support? Does support not sound important enough?
Exactly. I do think it's that. I really do.
I'm sweating a little bit because as a writer, oh my God, now I have all of these things I have to think about. How do you help your team not get overwhelmed with all of the ways in which their content is supposed to be used?
I have an incredible team. And maybe the thing I can say I've done is that we just keep focusing on the quality of the content. What does quality mean? Is it doing the things we want it to do? Is it addressing, is the logic sound? Are we saying things as concisely and clearly as we can, as precisely as we can? Are we using, this is one of my faves, concrete versus abstract language? Are we hiding? Because, and again, I'm going down an alley, but often abstract language, we're hiding something. We're either not exactly sure what's going on, so we'll just use an abstraction that can kind of encompass a lot of things. But that doesn't help a reader. That makes it just as confusing to the reader as when they started. We focus on all of those little details, but I think that the result of that is that it spins up into quality content and content that can do the things we want it to do, or our clients want it to do.
So while I would love to ask you to define quality content, I'm not going to, because you actually just gave us a really nice list. But I am going to ask you if and how you measure the success of the content. Like, how do you know that the content hit the mark, not just in terms of the subject matter, but also you have a client to please.
Not only does the client have to approve it, but then it has to also in the world do the job that the client wants it to do. So it's like the editor, the client, and then like the population they're trying to honestly sell to, right? A lot of it is listening to clients. And then a lot of it is asking questions I sometimes don't want to ask, like, how'd that content do? Because that opens the door for them to be like, oh, you know what, we loved it, but we didn't care to look at the metrics. Let's go look. And maybe it didn't perform well.
It's so difficult to rate content. Mm-hmm. If we are SEO nerds, then it's easy. How many eyeballs did you get?
Well, yeah, exactly.
But we know that it doesn't matter how many eyeballs you get. It's how many true readers? How many conversations have you been able to start?
Mm-hmm. Who do the eyeballs belong to?
Yeah, and do they become loyal readers? And it would be wonderful if we could put one LinkedIn post out there and it would convert, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Sell, 20,000 of what we have to offer. Mm-hmm. In truth, we need to create enough curiosity that people will come back, will follow us, and maybe notice the next thing that we say. It's probably going to take us 30 attempts to get someone to notice us.
I always think of this kind of content as really building conversation. And if I'm just talking at you, it's boring, So how do you create that sense of conversation?
It's hard, and it's hard in part because it's hard to communicate the value of it to clients sometimes. And I'll go into why for a second, but first I'll talk about a time when it worked really well. So we had a client that was really focused. They sold a database product. So basically you want access to data, they can provide it, and they collect it and gather it in different ways. And we would write for them content that pulled largely from their database. So we would pull some sample data and then kind of write analysis of it, tie it to trends, et cetera. And one of these pieces they promoted on LinkedIn and, summarized the takeaway. Here's this opportunity. And someone commented on it and was like, actually, this kind of misunderstands one of the underlying problems here, which is XYZ. And they came to us and they were like, what do we do? And I was like, no, this is good. This is really good because someone in your target audience read that, thought it was important enough to respond to, and is like responding to it here in public. Like, this is very good because it demonstrated to us, like, we touched a nerve. We were close enough to the things people care about to get them to weigh in on them. And for me, that is like, to your point, like we're getting people curious, we're getting people's attention, and that demonstrates that it works, that it's working.
You can put all the content out there that you want, but how do you get that? Sorry, Beth. How do you get that engagement? How do you get the person at the other end to interact with the content?
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think it's also, the framing of that is that we're trying to trigger an action on the other person's part. But like, I don't necessarily think that's always really hard because people already want to do things. There are people out there who want what we're offering. There are people out there who have problems we can solve. And I actually think it's much easier to figure out what those problems are, how people think about those problems, and then frame what we're doing in a way that addresses those problems. Going back even to the question of SEO, like good content and SEO is so much of the way we think about and talk about content marketing, and marketing in general maybe, is framed by the measurement tools we have. And when we do that, and I get it, like I know that businesses need numbers to assess whether things are working, but it's easy to like have conversations that only deal with the numbers and that lose sight of what the numbers represent or what the numbers are a proxy for, because like nobody wants more traffic. What is traffic? Who cares? But what it's a proxy for is that people are learning about your solution when they have a problem you can solve.
I would like you to put all of that on a t-shirt.
Yep, great.
Because I feel like for years I've been screaming that it's not really about eyeballs.
Right.
It's about that connection.
We're going to need triple XL t-shirts. That's a lot.
This is Lead Your Team to Creative Goodness and Greatness this month here at Story Mode.
Love it.
And how many people are on your team?
4, including me.
You're writing a lot. You're producing a lot. Some of the subject matter, it's all interesting in its way, but perhaps not as exciting as an HBO series. Oh, yeah. So how do you keep that sense of creativity, interest, excitement? I always want to say that sense of wonder that a writer needs to answer the questions that are before her.
Because one thing we look for when we hire is curiosity. I mean, we like explicitly say we want someone who's curious. The further you get into any subject matter, the more interesting it gets. And we are really lucky that a lot of the work we do is ghostwriting. So we are often talking to experts, who know a lot of information and just asking them questions that we would never get to ask these people if this weren't our job, and we just sort of like extract their thoughts and then do the thing we're good at, which is writing a piece, a written piece. But I don't want to dodge the question entirely, because I think there are ways that you can kind of cultivate that, and I think everyone has natural curiosity, like I don't think anyone's sitting there like, I don't want to know things. But I think a lot of it is being curious generally as a team, being curious about each other, being curious about our lives and the company and stuff like that. One of the practices we started when the pandemic hit was that we had a daily check-in meeting in the mornings. And we didn't do that when we were all in the office together, but we kind of found it was necessary to be like, okay, what's coming to me when, because it's like handing things back and forth for editing and making sure we're staying on track with client deadlines and all that kind of stuff. And it's very practical. We do it, but also we could do that work in about 3 minutes. And it's a 15-minute conversation every day. And what happened over the course of the last 3+ years is that we've gotten to know each other really well. And my team now, nobody on that team was ever in the office. So we've all gotten to know each other through these meetings and through working together. And we talk about during those calls a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with our work, except that I think to be good at our work and to have the energy and curiosity and sometimes like the stamina to power through what is a little boring or difficult subject matter on the research end and on the writing end requires that like investment in the people you're working with. So I'm a big believer. It's a very indirect, it's very unmeasurable, but I've experienced it, and like my team is very good.
You're absolutely right. It's not just a sense of curiosity around the content, but around one another.
Mm-hmm. I think I was actually thinking, Jill, she's helping us with point 4 in our seminar next Thursday, which
out of 5.
make progress a team sport.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the writing that you do that we would call, creative writing? And I'm especially interested in how that affects the content writing.
There's been a really unintentional back and forth feeding of content to creative writing throughout my career, which I would never have. This is not the trajectory I would have chosen for myself. I would have, written a best-selling book coming out of college and been set, as so many writers would prefer, right? But what happened is that my first job out of college, I worked for a company that was lead gen for attorneys. And so I was doing 50 state pages. So I would have to write bankruptcy laws in Maryland, bankruptcy laws in Massachusetts, bankruptcy laws in Michigan. And so it's this, and by the way, bankruptcy laws are at the federal level. So it was not different. I just had to use different words so that it wasn't duplicate content. And I didn't know any better. And I would write 5 or 10 of these pages a day, 500 words. And, because it was mindless, and what it forced me to do is A, learn to write really fast, and B, learning all the different substitutions that can say the same things in different ways, which is also it enabled me to write faster elsewhere. It's like, oh, this isn't working. Let's try this other, you swap things around more quickly. That served me really well when I went to grad school and I was writing poetry, because so much of that is about how you say, often a first draft for me is like, here's the idea I'm thinking about. And then the rest of it is, how do you say it? I found that I had a skill, like that skill translated in a very strange way. The other thing that has been really useful to me in both my, both areas, creative and professional writing, is just not being precious about a draft. I mean, I had to write so much for that job and I just had to do it. And I just like couldn't care. And, you know, it was nice that like, it was kind of low stakes. It was like, this is just information. You know, it's this kind of stuff ChatGPT can do for you now. But I mean, now the relationship between the two has evolved as I've evolved in my career and as a writer. I'm writing more fiction these days. And, you know, I talked earlier about interviewing experts about their work. So much of that has turned up in my fiction because otherwise I would have a ton of stories about marketing professionals, you know, like you live in Chicago, like I do, to be clear. But sometimes people are in tech or they're in you know, music or whatever. So
you said the words that get me going.
Uh-huh.
How the heck is AI going to affect us all as content creators?
Yeah.
What's your take on all that? Because when I think about it, I just have to grab a bourbon and go to bed.
Yep. I mean, I think about that a ton. Obviously, we all have to right now. I saw a very interesting article a while ago, and it was specifically about Google's new, I forget what it's called, but it's essentially like AI answers. I think it's in beta right now. But the person who wrote the article, their critique of it was essentially, this is going to work for a while, but what Google is doing is strip mining the internet. It is, so for a while, it will have all this rich content to pull from, and it will be able to serve really relevant answers. But after a certain point, I mean, people are turning off the robots TXT file that allows ChatGPT to scrape a site. Who knows if they're actually honoring that? I certainly don't have the technical knowledge to know, but and also people will stop publishing things in a way that is available to ChatGPT and other AIs. So for one thing, I don't think that's sustainable, for example, from a search perspective. But there's also, this is my like thing I've been thinking for a while, even before ChatGPT took us by storm, which is that I think it might force us out of the era of relying too much on proxies, relying too much on measurement and numbers for a thing that really isn't measurable, which is sentiment, which is like the ability to connect to people. And really, we've known that that's what we're like. I think marketers kind of know that's what we're trying to do. But being forced through the lens of numbers and digital measurement in particular makes it very hard to act on that. And so, for example, my evil scheme that I have been cooking in my head is like, if Comcast were smart, like a hated company, everyone hates Comcast, they would commission a show like The Office about Comcast employees. Because like, you know how people have like Dunder Mifflin t-shirts? Like Dunder Mifflin's not the hero in that show, but like, we love it. It's like a beloved brand because we connected emotionally to these characters. So like Comcast, call me, you know, like create, because there are so many brilliant writers and creators out there who could do this for them. That's what brands could be doing with content marketing.
Tell us what you're reading.
Okay. Elizabeth George. I love murder mysteries, and I've recently started reading Elizabeth George mysteries. It's
Inspector Lindley.
Yeah, exactly. Careless in Red.
Describe your perfect workday.
Fresh coffee. It's a very good batch. And let's see, we have our morning meeting and someone brought a really interesting article and it gets us talking and we go over time. Oopsies, but that's okay. The work of the day is writing my own piece and editing a colleague's work, not revisions. I know they are really important, but they're not my favorite thing. So that's some really, really deep work doing those things. Then I have a call with someone who's looking for content services. I'm able to answer some questions about how we might be able to help them. I'm able to offer them some resources. And let's see, we close out the day with a client check-in call, and they're very excited about how things are going. They have great news about the performance of a piece we wrote. No new problems.
No new problems. So that does sound like a perfect day, but I also want to hear, where do you sneak off for lunch?
This is my lunch seat. I'm usually at my standing desk in the other room. And a lot of times during lunch, I work on my novels.
Oh,
So that's my little sneak away.
What questions do you have? Like what are you grappling with that you would like our story mode world to help you solve?
Oh, interesting, because I was going to ask you questions about story mode itself. I was going to sort of reverse the books and interview you a little bit.
Oh dear. Beth, are you up for it?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, okay, most fun thing about running story mode and also most challenging.
To me, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the most fun thing is that Jill and I have known each other forever. And once we put ourselves together, the creativity explodes between us. At the same time, we always say this. We always end in the same location, but our processes, our creative brains work in entirely different ways. And so sometimes the challenge for when Jill is explaining what she has in mind, I know we're going to get to the same place, but I just don't get her methods. And I know the same is true when I'm producing something or explaining how I think it could go. And she's always like, I don't see it. I don't see it, but we always get there.
I'm a mess. When I create something, I am a complete and total mess. And it's almost like I see the image, but it's all pixelated and the pixels aren't quite in the right spot yet. The other thing I would add, that is why I love story mode and I love what we're doing and who we work with. I just love stories. I love hearing stories. And obviously, in my career, I've worked with a lot of creative writers, and their stories are always awesome. And one would think that if we're working with people who, are product managers at a manufacturing company, or people who are consultants and live in this, nebulous, undefinable world of consulting, that they would be boring to us. And yet humans are endlessly fascinating. And it doesn't matter their job. It doesn't matter their education level. Life is just interesting. And so that's what has kept me doing this for so long.
Actually, the way you just described our customer base is another one of those things that is both joy and challenge for me. Because what we deal in is story, and we know that everyone on earth thinks and talks in story. We have a hard time narrowing our target. What we have to offer, we can't imagine why everyone doesn't. And we know better. We're marketing people. So we know we need to focus. We know we need to tell a detailed story to a specific audience. And sometimes it's a struggle because everyone's a candidate.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It's almost like I'm at the buffet table. I love everything on this table. Yeah. But how the heck am I going to make this choice? I'm going to go for dessert, but I'm going to skip the salad. I don't think we'll ever be bored.
Good. I love that.
We can't. It's our motto, refuse to be boring.
Who wants to have the last word?
I want to literally ask you to give us the last word, Brenna.
Ooh, okay.
So if there is a business word that you could eradicate from the vocabulary, right now will be the last time this word is ever spoken. What's that word that you want to eliminate from everyone's vocabulary?
Actioning.
Actioning?
Done. We never need to say it again.
I can't even say it.
So that's the opposite of what we talked about before. Action is a perfectly good noun, and people felt like it wasn't enough, so they turned it into a verb that doesn't really say anything.
Ooh, that's hurting my head.
Thank you. Perfect.
Well, thank you for joining us. This conversation has been Story Mode with Brenna Lemieux, who is a content whiz. And we're so thankful for having your time and your energy and your unique and penetrating way you look at things. You've really given me a lot to think about. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a joy to be on, and I'm just so honored that you thought of me.
Brilliant. Thank you.